Tracy,
Here I
it's been
am,
2 weeks. How you doing?
It has been 2 weeks. I'm doing great. I know you're looking great today. I love the smile.
Thank you.
Hey, guys, welcome. Money. They say that money makes the world go round. Is that true? Is that false? But who's got your money is one statement that Grant Cardone says, and I think there's a chief driving force for every economy, and it may not be money. What if it was dun 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 sales? The driving force for every economy, if it's salespeople. And I've heard it tell Paul that everybody is selling something.
Well, yeah, and today I'm going to sell something because I'm taking it right away from you, man.
Go with it. Let's do it.
Something got on my radar this week, and I just think it's like uber important for every business owner to know what's coming down the pike.
Okay.
So there is a fight going on right now in the U.S. Supreme Court. It is Lober Bright Enterprises versus Ramondo. Okay, so and they are testing a 1984 decision, which was Chevron, and this is back in the Reagan era. I think I was a whole 18 years old when this went out, and at the time I did not care about what's going on in the legislature, because that's usually not really, it's kind of boring stuff, but it's not. It's a big deal. So are you familiar with the case?
So of course I am not. I was 9 years old in 1984. And the only thing else I remember about 1984 is a book. I think was not put out in 1984, but a scientific book on 1984 was put out, and I've read that one before. You gotta enlighten me. Tell me this Supreme Court case.
All right.
What is it? So
I really want to start with the basics here. I just want to make sure that everybody's had a basic understanding of kind of how laws get put in place, because it's really important. So like you want something done, you want it as a law, it's got to go into committees, and they kind of write up this law, and then it ends up in either the House of Representatives or the Senate, and they vote on it, and then it has to be voted on in a positive fashion. It's got to win in both the House and the Senate, and then it goes to the president and he has a choice: sign it into law, or he can, if he doesn't like it, he can veto it. And then there's the 2-run rule, where it can go back to the House and Senate and get voted positively again. And then on that 2-run rule, it basically overrides the president at that point, so he can't veto it twice. Based on laws, there are always unintended consequences, right? So back in 1984, there was a case where Chevron, and I believe it was Department of, I can't remember, but what happened was that the government agency put a regulation out that was in between the inferences of the law. And what happened is it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, hey, when there's fuzzy area or gray space, the government can make a regulation. And it was good at the time because it was all about natural resources, and they thought it was a good law. But the unintended consequences were, it gave the Department of Labor and it gave the executive branch overarching power in the vacuum of the law. So it basically said that if there's a question on interpretation, the executive branch could just make a rule, where the DOL just kind of keeps making rules. They keep making rules that, and fines and all of that stuff, and processes and procedures for companies out there. Well, that's on the table again after nearly 40 years. And they're looking at in this Romano case. And if this gets overturned, it is going to be massively good for business. Okay,
Mm.
because the Department of Labor they tend to make a lot of rules. This has impacted a lot of industries, very specifically the life, health, and annuity space. Department of Labor has been all over them. I was actually involved in a project for the first DOL rule that impacted them about 10 years ago. Well, it'd be more like 7 years ago. And it was just an absolute nightmare. But the fact of the matter is, if the Supreme Court over the next couple of days comes to a decision and their test of this fares toward business as opposed towards government, then it's going to push lawmakers into having to do their job. It's going
Mm-hmm.
it's going to put more of this to test, and these partisan rules kind of disappear because it's whoever's in charge makes the rules. As far as our government goes, for the past quite a few years, 40 to be exact, and now it's going to put things where they should be back into Congress to tighten up the laws, and then things can be tested in the court system. It's going to create a lot more activity in the court system because they're going to want to test everything. But it's crazy. I can't believe it's back. It's that the Supreme Court's hearing it right now in this current political environment.
So what makes yeah, thank you. Yeah, I got to do more research on this to discover the details. I'd like to know, like, if it's overturned and in a positive fashion, and if it impacts businesses, in what way would they feel the impact initially?
Well, so there's a lot of regulation that's going to be put in question. So at first, it's going to turn into kind of a governmental nightmare, right? Because a lot of the regulations that are out there, people are getting fines for doing things based on regulations that were written in the gray area of the law, and those fines are going to be, it's a lot's going to get tested in court if this law gets overturned. So that's going to be the initial impact. The other impact, it will be harder for government agencies to create regulations just to create regulations. Okay, and that's a
So
positive impact for business.
Government gets smaller, it shrinks, and we, the people, have more liberties.
You just put it in place. I couldn't have said that any better. It gives power back to the people. And right now the power is in government, so we are overregulated, and this is something the past administration tried to eliminate a lot of regulations, but this law was still in place. It's not a partisan issue for me. It is a 100% a people issue. It is that legislation law needs to be made, right, based on the people that we elect to represent us out there, and protect people. But it is not. It's not an open letter to be a quasi. What's the? I don't a quasi. I'm losing the term I want here because I don't want it to be overly dramatic, but it's a government run state. We're a state of the people, not a state of the government. I don't want to use what these people who want to be dramatic and go quasi fascist or quasi whatever. That's bullshit. What it is leaning the scales back towards the people, and the real power being in the people electing people to represent them in the government to get things done that help them.
For me, that sounds like in business. I'm sure. I mean, I no doubt you've consulted and counseled with business and coached through business owners. When policies, so we start with the values, like how are we going to do everything that we do? Well, we're going to do them with honor, dignity, and respect. Okay, there's the three core values. But then we write up policies that contradict our values. And so Ross Dress for Less is a retail store.
Sure.
And one of their thing is like, hey, we're for the people, you know, we love the customer. You want to give a great experience. Then they write a policy that if you come in with, you know, to return an item with all the tags still on it, but you don't have your receipt, you can't return that item. They won't even give you an in-store credit. And their policy contradicts the values. So like the values that were founded, that America founded, we the people, the Constitution. And then we introduce, like you said, all these regulations that distance us from what we actually were started as, what we were supposed to be. That seems to be like, that's the parallel I'm drawing from this thing. So these regulations impede what we were supposed to be. They impede capitalism or free enterprise and these kinds of things. Am I hearing that right?
Well, you're hearing that right. And there's actually a financial detriment that comes from overregulation. Okay, what people don't realize. So let's say you're producing a widget, and this widget does whatever, and the government comes in and said, okay, you're producing widget, and we've developed this set of rules that you have to make this widget under, and every one of those rules has a cost to it, right? So now the entire industry has, let's say that cost adds 20% to the cost of manufacturing, or 40% to the cost of manufacturing that widget, right? So the government, now you've obviously, we've spent money in taxes for this department to come in and regulate this industry. We've now increased the cost of producing what we need to produce by 20, 40%. We have to pass that cost off to our customers.
Our margin just went tighter.
Our margin went down, but just think of this. The fact that the cost and the sale price went up means the taxable rate on that went up. That money goes to the government. So they've just increased their revenue, by the way, right? And then you take enough industries and you put that regulation in on all these industries, the tax revenue gets higher. So there's a benefit to the government for having regulations, because it increases, sales tax and tax on, and increases the amount of people it takes. Plus it increases the number of people in the government to manage the regulation. And at the end of the day, all this in play creates inflation, because if you go across all industries, then the prices go up when a new regulation goes. Not to mention the cost to the company that's being regulated to put in all the processes to manage the regulation, right? Because if you're talking about enterprise, you have an entire department called compliance that is there to manage the production of the product or service so that they stay under the compliance of the regulation. So it like any regulation that comes out that isn't well founded is just a giant cost factor. Does that make sense?
Yes. I was just thinking about and we increased jobs. Because now we have this compliance department that has to, we're growing and we've increased jobs in not a good way.
Or conversely, we go out of business because we can't manage the regulations.
Now we go out of business.
Right. Jobs. You know how many restaurants have gone out of business because of certain regulations, right?
Absolutely.
Let's take it back to the restaurant industry, since that's where you're from. What's happened in the restaurant industry with new regulations that aren't based on current laws? They're based on committees or commissioners, that have taken them out. This has happened a lot. Talk to me about that.
Well, people. So I know only from pre-pandemic the way that restaurants did business, and even post-pandemic. When I was in food service industry, you were in food service industry too. You know the way that it was run back in quote unquote the day. You understand that, and then I understand what it was doing in 2016, 17, 18, 19, and then things switched, and then places went out of business, and they still haven't recovered. I mean, they shut down, certain avenues of business. Their lobby was shut down. And so now creative, innovative companies have worked around that. They just kind of like, I'm going to grow despite what the government restrictions are. Chick-fil-A and others, they're going to continue to prosper and grow. But some of those regulations for other people, that were stuck in a 1970s playbook or 1980s playbook, they haven't made the adjustment.
Makes sense.
They haven't made any adjustment. And I mean, like, so I think, like, Paul, I think I'm of the opinion, at least, that, like, I can complain about the government, what they're doing, but, like, while I'm complaining, I'm missing opportunities that are truly there. And so, like, I've always been like, hey, listen, I can complain about it, but I still love America and I still am doing this. And, like, yeah, do I want it to be better? Absolutely. But, like, okay, what am I going to do? All I got to do is the government's not coming to save me. They're going to be thinking about their own. What can I do, since they put these regulations on me that restrict me? What can I do to make things better? And the companies that figure that out and that innovate and get creative about that, they're the ones that prosper even in a highly restrictive or highly regulatory economy that we're in. So those businesses, I'd like to hear from you, those businesses that, like, they innovated, the Chick-fil-A's, the Chipotle, whoever it was that innovated during that time of heavy restrictions. What happens when those restrictions are released and there's now wiggle room? What do?
They grow.
I mean, like, I'm thinking, like, they went to the moon.
And that's kind of the point, right? Is that you want to unleash. There are regulations that are absolutely great. They're there to protect the consumer. They're there to protect the environment. They're there to protect a lot of things. But again, it can't be. To me, it can't be a bureaucrat that dictates what an industry does. It needs to be, and that's why there are lobbyists, right? And there are lobbyists. They're there to educate the legislature. I mean, we elect these officials in. They do not know everything in the world. They're elected in. They probably come from a specific area, and they know that area, but they don't know everything. So the level of education that lobbyists provide and help the legislature understand the situations that small business has its own lobbying group in DC, and they're there to ultimately to educate the legislature on how the industry can thrive, or based on regulations, how it could squash the industry, right? Because the ultimate idea of the regulation is should be to protect the consumer, to protect the environment, to protect our way of life, and allow a business or an industry to operate so that they can be profitable in our society. So it's got to leverage that both, and they can't do that without the lobbyists, right? You watch these movies and it's always negative on lobbyists, and that's the funniest thing in the world. They're there to educate. They're there to work with the legislature to help them, because the legislature doesn't know. They don't work in these industries, okay? And without them there to do that, but in the current environment, it's difficult. And it's difficult because of the power that the executive has that they ultimately shouldn't have. Okay, that power should be in the court system and in Congress, not in the executive branch.
So I have a question.
Sure.
Who stands to gain, in your opinion, who stands to gain with heavy regulatory? And I understand the government, those kinds of things, but, like, who stands? I mean, is it corporate America that stands to gain, like bigger businesses, like the small guy? We kind of keep, like, this lid on him to where he doesn't, I mean, you can grow that small business, but only so far as our regulations allow. Like, who stands to gain most from highly restrictive, big government policies?
The government. It's about power.
Mm.
The government stands to gain.
Is it
It's not.
all
It's restrictive. Most of the regulation, in government gains on. Well, there's a couple of things. Um, Depending on the rule, right? So we always talk about impacts, right? What's the impact? There's intended impacts of any uh,
Yep.
rule or legislation or law, and then there's the unintended impacts. Part of the problem is that our elected officials are only in for 4 years or 2 years at a
Right.
time, and they get you know some of them get reelected, but they generally think in four-year increments. So outside
Mm.
of that 4 years, what's the impact? Right? This
Yeah.
Chevron rule is a great example of that, because when the ruling came down in 1984, the immediate impact was positive.
Hmm.
Okay. But then, as time went on,
Mm.
it became a loophole
Yeah.
for government to institute regulation, for the executive
Yeah.
branch to institute regulation without
Mm.
without any input from the people. Right?
Which a
Congress is
lobbyist
the
would.
people.
Yeah.
It is a representation of the people. Congress is the people. So now the executive branch is putting together rules based on the gaps in law, and you have to understand that the original Chevron ruling was more about a deference, right? In the event that the law was unclear, the executive, the the rule kind of leaned towards government, right? Government could do what they wanted with it without it being tested in court.
Mm.
Okay, and that's where all of this crazy regulation came into play.
Hmm.
So this is this
Yeah.
this particular fight in the Supreme Court is putting the ultimate test to that first ruling.
Hmm.
And if they
Yeah. And it made me wonder. It made me like, I'm just thinking about the shelf life of regulations that put in. Like maybe, like you said, man, it was this great thing in 1984. But like when did it started? Like with the unintended consequences, like you mentioned, they start to pop up. They start to grow, and now you're like, oh wait, like this was good for a time, but does that mean that every regulation that's put in, this is a great rule until it's outlived its usefulness, and now it's no longer serving us.
well, and that's the really interesting part of this, right? Because regulations can be changed by administrations,
Mm.
right? Based on this rule, where if
Mm.
regulations were based on law that had been voted in the House and the Senate and ratified by the president, those don't change easily.
Yeah,
They get amended.
like our
So
Second Amendment.
they not only have a shelf life, but they have an amendment process.
Yeah.
So if they find a gap, they can amend it, right? But it's got to go through the proper channels in the Senate and the House, and again be ratified by the president. Okay,
Mm.
so it's got to go through the process. That ultimately is the biggest problem. Okay, we talk about process all the time. When you do things outside of the process, things can go wrong. Okay, and this is the government. If a government operated like business, they would identify that and say, "Hey, we need to pull this in the process." And this
And
is
that's why we
effectively where the Supreme Court is being asked: is this in process or out of process? Now, if the Supreme Court goes in the direction of government still has the power, then that's going to be a part of the process, and runaway regulation will continue to happen regardless of who's in the House.
Mm.
So, well, this is why I say it's negative for everybody. is
Yeah.
negative when government has unbridled power.
Yeah.
And the unintended consequence of the 1984 decision gave government effectively unbridled power.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, I was thinking of like, okay, where else have I seen or read, studied, researched a policy, a regulation, a something that was put into effect by an administration? I was thinking about Franklin Roosevelt and Social Security as we know it, like what we know it today, and how it was started and why it was started, and now it's just kind of continue to perpetuate. And like, was it really intended to be that lengthy of a change, an adjustment to where it now affects the way that everything's living because people were dying, Great Depression, those kinds of things, didn't have any money and everything. So I was just thinking like the shelf life of a law, putting it into the power of an administration that wants to keep it in effect, or like you said, the previous administration was more business minded, operated and ran America like a business. Hey, it wasn't in our best interest to, do dealings with this. So we put these embargoes on other countries or whatever. I'm just thinking about if this is, will it be this week? I mean, like, a little
Well,
bit more than I do
it's
on
in
this.
the court. I'm not sure when they're going to have an opinion when they write their opinion. I'm not sure when that happens. It got on my radar this week, and it was particularly interesting to me. And I think it should be interesting to every business owner out there. This is like the Super Bowl of legislation from the business standpoint. This is going to have far-reaching impacts, or it's going to be a continued business as usual. If it goes one way, it ultimately is going to put a lot of regulation to the test, which is good. Checks and balances, right?
Sure.
It's gonna provide a little more flexibility for business to do business, um, and it's going to put the onus on Congress to start producing laws that are beneficial for the environment, beneficial for the people, and it will become more about the people than the power of government. So to me, this law is like it's monumental. If depending on
Wow.
which way it goes.
I appreciate you shifting today because I did not know. Well, I certainly didn't know about this one. I didn't know the history of it from 1984. And you bring up a great point about the unintended consequences. And I was just thinking about in all of our business, every policy that we put together, like it maybe is a great policy at the time, but maybe after a while, like, oh, we need to adjust. That's no longer serving us. That, like you've heard the adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But then I've often thought, like, if it ain't broke, when will it break? If it ain't broke, could it be improved? And if it ain't broke, like I have so many things in my attic, in my shed, our garages, or like some people have so much stuff in their garage they never park their car in there, right? Because they got a lot of unbroke things that they don't want to discard, but are not like serving them. They're hanging their laundry on their Peloton. It's like it ain't broke, but it ain't serving you either, right? So I was just thinking, like in business, there's a lot of policies that like, okay, are they really serving us still?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would challenge every owner to be looking. Policy comes from process, right? So you build policies based on your business processes, and you should be reviewing your processes, which will
Mm-hmm.
in turn improve your policies.
Mm-hmm.
And
What would be that? I love that because I enjoy processes because processes to me means repeatability.
right,
Processes means you can duplicate the same thing every time. And that goes for not just the product that you're building as far as the quality. I mean, if there's a process involved in it, if you shortchange the process on refining steel and things like that, you're going to have weaker steel than what you used to have. So the quality went down because you didn't follow the process. And I think in like from where I come from in food service, many times the evening crew is got lower marks than the morning crew. Morning crew is typically going to be, a lot of adults that are used to following a standard. Evening crew might be some young kids that are in there, working their first job or second job or whatever. They're in there for like 3 months or whatever. And so they're not as strict as following the policy. They're just going to want to make it through their shift and go home to their Xbox or whatever that is. I'm not trying to be hard on them. It's just, it's the nature of things. So a process for something, the standard to be followed all across the way, reviewing those processes. How often should a business review their processes to ensure they still serve them? That they don't need to be updated.
Well, there's the reactive idea of you review a process when something goes wrong, right? Then there's the preparatory review of getting ahead of it and taking a look at your processes departmentally every quarter, company wide.
Okay.
There's a departmental process for whatever it may be, and then there's the how it ties into the company's goals, right? Vision, values, and that gets reviewed probably as you're doing your annual plan. That is the time to review those interdependencies in your processes.
That's a great point. I was thinking there one other, like I wrote down, when something goes wrong, so you're highly reactive or you're proactive and you're looking for, like, hey, we're going to come to this quarter. What are the big rocks? We talked about the EOS system the other day. Like, what are the big rocks that we want to accomplish in this next quarter? So you're kind of looking ahead for those things. And I love how you put out, okay, what's our goals? What's our targets for this year? And what needs to be, tweaked or adjusted in order to, what do we need to review as far as our process, like drive-through. I mean, I want to have, 65 cars, in our peak hour and everything. Well, then, okay, how many do we currently have? 48. Well, whoa, you want to get that many more cars in when you only have 48? You're going to have to look at because now you know the target. Now you're going to have to back into it and find out, what is it going to take to get that many cars in there. We're going to have to adjust the process. But I think here's something I saw, Paul, so I come from a background also of pastoral ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And so this funny thing, so our auditorium, it's interesting, our auditorium is basically, 40 by 60, right? And we have no need for a TV screen. We have no need for 2 monitors in the building. And yet some pastors would say, oh, you got to have your TV screens up there because this church over here had this, this big TV screen. And so, like, I was just thinking about, they adjusted their process just because everybody else was doing it.
So
they made that, it doesn't serve them at all.
Absolutely. So we've got a question from a listener. I think this is a really solid question. So I'm going to read this in. The question is, from a business standpoint, what policies in your current state might need to be improved to serve business owners and entrepreneurs? Wow. That's a great question. I'm going to let you start off, and I'll talk about my state here in a minute.
Well, man, so is that in the current state of affairs in the business, or currently state like in America?
I'm thinking he's talking about current state, as in the state that you're in.
Okay. So, well, first of all, I want to applaud the one who put the question in here, because that might need to be improved. And I love this: to serve. Like, the focus is not on me. Like, you were just talking about this big government, and the focus is on, I want more power, I want more power, I want more power. This is what we do. Like, well, go eat somewhere else. That kind of thing. That is not, you're not there to serve. So I love the way that this question was put together, because it needs to be improved. When you're thinking about business owners and entrepreneurs, how better can I serve them? Man, that is really good. I think I can serve them better by following up more. I mean, like, I'm not checking in with them, on like I could be. So that's just in full transparency from me. my business from that business standpoint, like, what is it that they need? What, how can I serve you better? Hey, we're doing a great job. You keep on coming back, but what can I do differently that would give you more benefits? I just love the way that, because that's my passion. My passion is to serve other people. What are your thoughts?
So my thoughts, and it's very specific since it was the state. We'll go with Minnesota, specifically Minneapolis, right? And I'm going to go with the restaurant industry since
Okay, thank you. They keep me in
there's
my lane.
some significant policies that are problematic for the restaurant industry in the city of Minneapolis. So as as I'm sure you know, with the explosion and the of the George Floyd incident here in Minnesota, which became into a very difficult discussion wrapped around policing in Minnesota, has the unintended consequence is a reduction in police force. Now, there was a big thing was like defund the police, and that what ended up happening is it's tough to be a police officer here in Minneapolis, right? So now they're low on roll call for the police, which means that there are less police out on the streets. So the restaurants that are downtown don't have traffic because people aren't willing to go downtown. People in the burbs, out here in the burbs, who used to go downtown to a lot of the restaurants, won't go down there anymore because they don't feel safe. I don't feel safe. I'll bring that down to me. I don't feel safe going to downtown Minneapolis as things stand now. The unintended consequences is we've had in the city of St. Paul and Minneapolis, we've had a high closure rate of restaurants because they can't get the traffic, because people don't feel safe downtown. So the reverse in policy is that it would benefit restaurants is actually getting policies for police officers in a better place where they feel like they can grow the roll call so they can have the patrols to protect the people when they're downtown, so the traffic comes back and the restaurants can thrive. Mm-hmm. So it's the unintended consequences of the political driving that was going on down there has actually had a significant negative impact on restaurants. Mm-hmm. It's unintended. They didn't intend for restaurants to close. What they wanted was a better social construct in Minneapolis, and the way they went about it created the unintended consequence of restaurants closing.
Boy, that I love. My mind is going so many places just on the unintended consequence concept, like video cams, body cams and stuff like that. There was like, hey, we got to do this. We want to protect our guys. They're getting criticized for this, that, and the other. And there's unintended consequences that, if a guy's struggling and resisting arrest and is being violent, and this guy has to protect himself, and he has to do so by, some type of force that people are not, accustomed to seeing. Now it's reviewed and now it's misinterpreted, and there's an unintended consequence. A guy has been, now he gets no pay. He's 90 days restricted from the force for a thorough review. And then the political side of this is it would be better for the force not get defunded. We just go ahead and hang this guy out to dry.
Yeah. And it goes both ways, or it's completely supported, right? It could be absolutely true. And unfortunately it's based on interpretation as opposed to reality. Your reality is always clouded by your perspective. Okay. The reality is always clouded by your perspective. What are your inherent biases in your head? That's going to
filter all the information that we get in the world through those biases.
Exactly. So it's not easy in any way, shape, or form. But getting back to the point, those policies need to change so that restaurants can thrive down there, and retail stores, and it's hurting a great town. you know, and I hear people say, well, it's so sad. It is a construct that we created as a
Yeah.
people. Okay. And we need to fix how we deal with it. And we need to look a little further down the road and understand the risks that each decision makes as a body politic. So
Mm-hmm.
it's an interesting discussion, but ultimately, uh, this legislation is going to be really interesting, and I would challenge everyone who sees this to go out and look at it from the perspective of how will this impact my business, and
Mm-hmm.
what can I do to uh, take advantage of it to grow, or
Yeah.
to shore myself up in my processes, to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that I can handle whatever's going to come.
Yeah. No doubt. In an election year, things like this will make their way into some type of debate. I would imagine, based on the largeness of the current government and the executive power that's been given, that is an unintended consequence. I think somebody told me one time that you could do you've got free will to make your own choices, but you just don't get to choose the consequences. And some of the consequences were intended, and then some of them were not. What's interesting to me is like based on perspective, I interpret this as an unintended consequence, and yet somebody else may look at it as like, oh no, we meant that.
Yeah,
What you actually
true.
meant? I'm like devious stuff, right? Like they actually meant. No, this is what I meant to happen, and that's where I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all. I don't. Maybe I tuck my head in the sand and just I know that there's evil in the world. I know that. I understand there's wickedness and even in high places. But I just want to I want to believe that these are unintended consequences and not somebody like trying to jerk the steering wheel and move us into a different direction. And yet there's a part of me that understands, that's true too.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, because I have a perspective of I believe everybody is inherently good, and I have that bias. So I just assume these consequences are unintended, which they may not be. So I will take ownership of that from my perspective, just because who I am. So
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
but go look at this. Go look at
Yeah.
Loper Bright Enterprises versus Ramondo. Keep an eye on it. It's there should be an opinion within the next couple of weeks. It's going to have overreaching impact on business across the board if it goes in the favor of the people. And if it continues to be in the favor of the government, then it will. We will be at the mercy of the executive when the law is gray, when it's a gray area. So is the world we live in. So
Yes, it is.
anyway,
Very good.
I've got to go,
Thank
my
you.
friend.
I loved it.
And I'll see you next Thursday, same time.
Look forward to it, Paul.